Hello, my name is Michael Tillotson and I am an author. Today we're going to talk about crossovers, shared universes, and why I hate them. Beware of spoilers for Amphibia. Okay, so first off, this is not some unambiguous burning hatred for all shared universes and crossovers. Broadly speaking, I find there are roughly 4 types of this kind of thing, and it's only 2 of them that I hate. There are small, fun crossovers that are more intended as Easter eggs than anything else. This would include something like a dude who looks almost exactly like Ryu from Street Fighter appearing in the background of... This would include something like a dude who looks almost exactly like Ryu from Street Fighter appearing in the background of a stage on Skullgirls. Obviously, this isn't trying to hint at any sort of deeper connection here. It's not trying to say that Street Fighter and Skullgirls are in the same universe. It's not trying to say that Street Fighter and Skullgirls are in the same universe. It's more just a fun nod saying, hey, this is a game that inspired our game. And these kinds of crossovers are fine. They're just fun nods to other series, and there's nothing wrong with that. On the other side of the spectrum, though, is this same kind of idea where they're fun nods to other series, but it's written in a way that's 100% supposed to imply that it's canon. The most obvious one that comes to mind is Amphibia's Gravity Falls reference episode, which very explicitly states that Gravity Falls exists in just another universe, but very much within the same canon. For shared universes, there are also 2 types. One type is where various different stories take place in the same universe, but you don't really need to read the different stories to be able to read any of the other ones. Obviously, this isn't referring to sequels and prequels and the like, and spin-off titles are a bit an odd one too. But if we were to pretend my 2 books... these 2 right here, The Heart of the World and Witch of the Starlit Coven, if we were to pretend they were in the same universe, but to be clear, they're not, but if they were, you could read either one of these books without reading the other, and then it would be totally fine. The other kind, though, is where the shared universe does require you to go... The other kind, though, is where the shared universe does require you to go through all of the material to have any semblance of what's going on. The big and most obvious example here is the MCU, but I'm actually going to use the hypothetical Smash Bros. Movie that people have been theorizing about. With the release of the Mario movie and the announcement of an upcoming Zelda movie, some people have gotten really excited about the idea of a Smash Bros. Movie where Nintendo releases all these individual movie series one by one and then brings them all together for a big Smash Bros. Finale. If you ask me, that idea sucks. I hate it. And don't worry, we're going to get into why, but later. These are the kinds of shared universes that I hate. Before we go any further, though, I feel like it's worth knowing that there's another category of the things that isn't nearly as common. I know of 2 examples, both of them strangely being involved with Final Fantasy, but they are Kingdom Hearts and World of Final Fantasy, and I really love both of these. This method of doing a crossover is 100% the best method, in my opinion. And this method is where you have a crossover like Final Fantasy and Disney, but it takes place in a separate canon to that of the original. Frozen in the context of Kingdom Hearts. Frozen in the context of Kingdom Hearts is based on, but totally separate from Frozen the movie. And heck, Squall from Final Fantasy even got his name changed to Leon. It's very clear these characters and locations are based on their own franchises, but they also exist totally separate from them. These ones are the best because even though they're technically crossovers, they don't really feel like it. They feel like their own worlds. They don't really run into any of the same problems that we're about to talk about. Okay, let's talk about crossovers first, or more specifically, the canon crossovers, where the world is directly connected to the original piece of fiction it's crossing over with. So, I like Amphibia in a vacuum. It's certainly not my favorite show in the world, but I do enjoy it, and I'm always glad to rewatch it. But Amphibia does something really annoying. See, Amphibia's world is written within the context of a multiverse, which is another writing trope I don't super love, but as far as this video is concerned, it uses the multiversal world to directly tie itself to 2 other shows, namely Gravity Falls and The Owl House. And furthermore, both of these shows in turn also acknowledged this crossover themselves as well, with the Owl House having at least one similar implied canon reference to Amphibia, and Gravity Falls referencing both of them in the Book of Bill, which I haven't actually read yet. I should do that at some point. The first problem with this idea of a canon crossover is the first problem with this idea of a canon crossover like this is a lot of the time these stories aren't actually written with the lore of the other stories of their crossover as a forefront concern. Gravity Falls obviously couldn't because it was written before either of these two shows came out. And I didn't watch them as they were coming out, so apologies if my information is incorrect here, but from what I understand, Amphibia and the Owl House were airing at the same time, so I didn't have all of the details on each other's series at the time either. And this can lead to some pretty weird situations. Both Gravity Falls and Amphibia implied a multiverse going on, so those two can mesh together fairly easily, but the Owl House never did. If we take the Owl House in a vacuum, it seems to imply there's the human realm and the demon realm, and that's kind of it. I never got the impression of other worlds in the Owl House, and the existence of other worlds kind of doesn't feel like it meshes with the world the Owl House built. Like, Titan blood is what causes the rifts between the two realms, but if the Owl House is in a big multiverse, why does Titan blood only seem to lead you to Earth? And on Amphibia's side of things, the fact that the stones let you jump from one dimension to another is like kind of a big deal. This was the power of Amphibia and Amphibia alone. And yet, the existence of being like Titans and Bill Cipher and his minions and Time Baby, beings who are 100% aware of and able to travel between different dimensions, kind of seems to counter this idea. And granted, Time Baby is from the future, so maybe we can just discount them there, but the Titans and Bill were definitely around. Did the Amphibians just, like, not know about them or something? What gives? It also kind of leads to this weird situation with Amphibia's ending that almost feels disrespectful to the other two shows. And to be clear, I don't think this was the intention of the writer in any way, but Amphibia's ending is fine on its own. After sacrificing herself to save Amphibia, Anne gets asked by this guardian deity of the multiverse to succeed them, to take over protecting the entire multiverse in their place. Anne was, after all, the only person in thousands of years to use the stones for good. Maybe at some point in the future I'll make an Amphibia-focused video essay about the ending as a whole, because there's a lot more to say about it, but as far as this discussion itself is concerned, this ending gets painted in a really weird light when you take it in the context of Amphibia being in a crossover with two other shows that weren't made by the same creator. It almost feels like this ending is saying, our protagonist is so much bigger and stronger and cooler than yours because she's going to be the guardian of the entire multiverse. And none of these problems would exist if the shows just weren't a crossover. They just feel so much better and well put together when they don't exist together because they weren't written to exist together, you know? And I was primarily using Amphibia as my example here, but this really applies to most any crossover. Amphibia is just the one I'm most familiar with and have seen the most recently as of making this script. The story either needs to be written with the idea of becoming a crossover in the first place, in which case it's most likely not even a crossover, just a shared universe, or it needs to be written in the previously mentioned alternate universe scenario. Otherwise, at least in my experience, it just feels like a really weird, like a bunch of stuff just Frankensteined together. And speaking of shared universes, in theory, a shared universe is so cool. You're telling me Mr. Hero from the book Mr. Hero and His Heroic Deeds is in the same universe as Miss Heroine from Miss Heroine and Her Heroic Feats? Cool. And as mentioned previously, this can be fine if these different books within the series aren't connected too heavily outside of direct sequels, prequels, spin-offs, and all of that. But where things really start to fall apart, I think, is when they come together. When you start to get entries in the series that expect you to have gone through the entries of multiple different subseries just to know what's actually going on. It's not that usually that big of a deal if it's just like a one-off crossover episode, like that one episode of Batman the Animated Series where Supergirl shows up. It's more of something when you have a full-blown movie that requires the context of 7 other movies, none of which are related to each other in any way. The most mainstream example of this, as mentioned, is the MCU, but like before, I'm going to use the hypothetical Smash Bros. Movie that people have been theorizing about, mostly because I just don't really like the MCU, so I don't watch them. Now, let me just start by saying I do understand the appeal here. When you have an A plot and a B plot running side by side in a single story, the big moments where they clash are always so satisfying, you know? When Skullgirls announced it was getting a webcomic, I was really excited because the way the story works in the video game is it just follows the stories of individual characters one by one, but they were sort of like alternate timelines. So what happened in one didn't necessarily happen in another. One obvious example is in one of these storylines, I forget which one, so don't ask, Miss Fortune is working alongside this detective dude, but in Miss Fortune's actual story, the detective dude doesn't show up until right at the end, and we never actually get any scenes with him. Even though they're all alternate timelines, though, and the specifics of how each story plays out are different, you can see as you go through the different stories that the fundamentals of the other character stories are still there. It creates this really nice patchwork feeling where you can see all these character stories happening side by side, but they're always missing that big come together moment since none of the individual timelines were canon. Something that was, as far as I read it, resolved by the comics, which started tying as far as I read it, resolved by the comics, which started tying these character stories together in really satisfying ways. And heck, one of my most anticipated books I want to write is literally using the standard tile. One of my most anticipated books that I want to write is literally using the stand-in title halves because the book is broken into 2 halves, and because the book is broken into 2 halves, as the 2 characters are pursuing their own goals while we're coming together for the big finale. But the big thing for me is these are single stories. The Skullgirls comic is a single comic. Halves is a single book. Once you start breaking these out into multiple different stories, it gets a little complicated because, for instance, let's say Nintendo did start pumping out a bunch of different movies. I would probably be super interested in the Kirby movies because Kirby is one of my favorite video game franchises, but I probably wouldn't be very interested in F-Zero because F-Zero doesn't really mean much to me. But then if I get, 6 movies deep into the Kirby series and then the Smash Bros. Movie rolls out, then if I want the next chapter of Kirby's story, I now have to go and sit through the 4 F-Zero movies that I don't care about or I'll be totally lost, you know? And in a way, it almost starts to take away from the individual stories we're working through up until this point, doesn't it? Suddenly, Kirby's battle against Dark Matter is kind of just this footnote compared to all the universes. Suddenly, Kirby's battle against Dark Matter is kind of just this footnote compared to all the universes banding together to fight Master Hand or Taboo or Galeem. And this never happened in the actual Smash Bros. Games because those are never trying to pass themselves off as canon, right? Nobody looks at Kirby lore and thinks, oh yes, Super Smash Bros. Ball was canon to this. But if it's all put within the context of a canon shared universe, then the individual character stories now exist only as stepping stones to reach the big crossover events. I don't know. The idea of a big shared universe like this was something I was really obsessed with back in middle and high school, but it was an idea that just stopped appealing to me as I got older, and hopefully hearing about why was at least mildly interesting. And that's all from me, and I'll see you in another video. I'm doing finger guns, I can't really tell because they're just below the camera, and I'm cutting this part out, but that's beside the point. Okay.